The Servant's Shadow, the city of Boston, with its cobblestone streets and historic charm, was where Eleanor and Thomas Whitaker had built their life together. They lived in a stately brownstone in Beacon Hill, a neighborhood known for its elegance and old-world sophistication. Eleanor, a painter with a delicate touch, spent her days in the sunlit studio on the top floor, while Thomas, a successful attorney, navigated the bustling legal world downtown. Their marriage, though not without its challenges, had always been rooted in mutual respect and love. But as the years passed, Eleanor began to feel the weight of their busy lives. The house, with its high ceilings and sprawling rooms, felt empty and cold. She longed for companionship, someone to share the quiet moments when Thomas was away at work. One evening, over a glass of wine by the fireplace, she broached the subject. "Thomas," she said softly, "I think we need help around the house. A servant, perhaps, someone to manage the chores and keep things running smoothly. It's too much for me to handle alone." Thomas, ever the pragmatist, agreed. "If it will make your life easier, my love, then we'll find someone." A week later, they hired Maria, a young woman from the nearby town of Cambridge. Maria was in her mid-20s, with striking features and a quiet demeanor. She came highly recommended, and within days, she had seamlessly integrated into their household. She cooked, cleaned, and even helped Eleanor in her studio, organizing her paints and brushes with meticulous care. At first, everything seemed perfect. Eleanor felt a renewed sense of freedom, and Thomas was relieved to see his wife happier. But as the weeks turned into months, a subtle shift began to occur. Maria's presence, once a source of comfort, became a point of tension. It started with small things. Thomas would come home late from work, and Maria would be the one to greet him at the door, her smile a little too bright. She began to take an interest in his cases, asking questions about his clients and offering opinions on legal matters. Thomas, flattered by her attention, didn't think much of it, but Eleanor noticed. "Do you think Maria is too familiar with you?" she asked one night, her voice tinged with unease. Thomas laughed it off. "Don't be silly, Eleanor. She's just friendly. You're reading too much into it." But Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Her suspicions grew when she began to find Maria in places she shouldn't be, lingering in Thomas's study, folding his clothes with a little too much care, even wearing a perfume that Eleanor recognized as one she herself had once worn. The final blow came on a cold December evening. Eleanor had returned home early from an art exhibition, her heart light with the success of the night. But as she stepped into the foyer, she heard voices coming from the study. She followed the sound, her footsteps silent on the polished wooden floor. What she saw shattered her world. Thomas and Maria were seated close together on the sofa, their heads bent in intimate conversation. Maria's hand rested on Thomas's arm, and he didn't pull away. The look in his eyes, soft, almost tender, was one Eleanor hadn't seen in years. "Thomas," her voice trembled as she stepped into the room. He looked up, startled. "Eleanor, I didn't hear you come in." Maria quickly stood, her face flushed. "I should go," she murmured, slipping out of the room. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. "What was that?" she demanded. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think. Maria was just upset about something. I was comforting her." "Comforting her?" Eleanor's voice rose. "Since when do you comfort the servants? Since when does she feel comfortable enough to touch you like that?" Thomas's expression hardened. "You're overreacting, Eleanor. There's nothing going on between us." But the seed of distrust had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. Eleanor couldn't look at Thomas without seeing Maria's hand on his arm, couldn't hear his voice without wondering if it had softened for her. She began to withdraw, spending more time in her studio and less time with her husband. Thomas, for his part, grew frustrated. He couldn't understand why Eleanor couldn't let go of what he saw as a harmless moment. The more she pulled away, the more he sought solace in Maria's company. It was a vicious cycle, one that neither of them knew how to break. The final straw came one evening when Eleanor returned home to find Maria wearing one of her dresses. The sight was like a slap in the face. She confronted Thomas, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "How could you let this happen?" she cried. "How could you let her into our lives like this?" Thomas, his patience worn thin, snapped. "Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your painting, you'd notice what's happening in your own home. Maybe you'd realize that I've been lonely too." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Eleanor stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't live like this." The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Eleanor moved to a small apartment in the South End, where she poured her heartache into her art. Thomas stayed in the brownstone, but the house felt emptier than ever. Maria, no longer needed, left quietly, her presence a ghost that haunted them both. In the end, it was Maria who had brought them together and torn them apart. She had been the catalyst for their happiness and their downfall. And as they moved on with their lives, they both realized that the servant's shadow would linger, a reminder of what once was and what could have been. Trust is the foundation of a relationship. Once trust is broken, it is incredibly difficult to rebuild. Eleanor's suspicions and Thomas's dismissiveness created a rift that grew too wide to bridge. The story highlights how even the smallest breach of trust can lead to the collapse of a marriage if not addressed with honesty and care.